Hey guys, it's John. You're on the JRB Tree Climbing channel. Ape Canyon Outfitters is now selling the JRB Garda Hitch Footloop as a kit. This device that you've seen me climb with, and I use it in all of my climbing methods, can be constructed by purchasing the kit. And the kit consists of simply a length of webbing, 2 carabiners, and 2 cords. I'm going to show you how to take that and convert it into this. And of course, you're aware of the fact that the JRB Garda Hitch Footloop provides me not only a foot loop for use in ascent, but this part here I call the best friend loop, provides a form of redundancy in a second and independent moving point of connection onto the rope that I use on my lower bridge. And this loop, which was added to the original design, is what I call the transformation loop, and I use that in certain types of climbing, like hitch climbing and stick climbing, where I want the Garda hitch to be run at a shorter length. Normally, that is benign and it just sits inside of it. I'm going to show you how to build it. I'm going to show you how to engage it. And of course, you can refer to my channel for how I use it.
This is my JRB Garda Hitch Footloop. Let's take a look at what we will be building. We're going to need to tie 5 knots to create this device. In the order we'll tie them. This knot here, created by the webbing around the 2 carabiners, is a variant of the bull hitch. You won't find this in any books. It's something I devised, and it's important that you use this variant and nothing else because it binds these carabiners together in such a fashion that they don't jockey apart. And that makes my variation of the Garda hitch much more reliable than the ones I had tested when I discovered this device. The webbing is closed into a loop, and the knot that I use to close it is called a water knot. Got a dedicated video on that. This device here is what I call the best friend loop. It's simply a length of 6mm cord. This is a clove hitch, and this is a sliding double fisherman's knot. And lastly, that loop I added since the original design that I call the transformation loop is affixed using a longhorn hitch onto the webbing. And we can slide this around and slide it around so that when we are not using it, which for me is most of the time, it's benign and it's just sitting in here in storage mode. We only use the transformation loop when we are shortening the length of our foot loop for certain types of climbing, but I don't need it in DSRT or SRT. As always, refer to the video description for links to related videos. Again, I've got dedicated videos on most of these knots. And refer to my website, jrbtreeclimbing.com, because we're going to be tying all of these 5 knots just one time. And in terms of what we need, well, I'm going to need a measuring tape to measure out my starting end. We're going to need a cutting device like a knife. And we're going to need some means by which to seal the ends of our cutting. So I'll use a lighter to flame the end of the webbing. But when I cut heat-resistant cord like TRC, I like to use heat shrink tubing that I apply to the end. As an alternative, you can just use tape. And if you happen to have something like this, this is a liquid rope whipping compound that we use to seal the ends of cords and ropes. I'm not a huge fan of it. I prefer the heat shrink tubing, and so that's what I'll be using today. Here in my hand, I have unraveled that length of webbing that came with the Garda Hitch Footloop kit. And on the right side, I've measured a 28-inch working end. And I'm going to build that bull hitch variant right on my finger. So again, working end is around the back. I am going to wrap it around the standing part 2 complete revolutions. So around the front and around the back. That's 1 trip. And a second trip around the front and around the back. And now I'll take the working end and flip it up and over the top. I now have to pass that down under, so I'm going to invert here so you can see what's going on. I need to go down under these two strands that are on the back. It's a little bit difficult to do and keep you in view, but let's give it a shot, going under them. Okay, so I've got that bull hitch formed. Now let's inspect it. On the front side, I've got my two overlapping strands and the one that went over. On the back side, I just have the two. On top, I've got two strands. And if I carefully inspect from the position of my finger, each of these two load strands coming out of the bottom, well, they go up on the opposite sides of my finger, and that's crucial because that ensures that the Garda hitch is loaded uniformly and those carabiners have a low likelihood of any kind of jockeying. Okay, let's grab a carabiner. Here is the Raider carabiner, and I like to orient it so it sits in the bull hitch this way. You'll notice the bull hitch has a slight slant to it, and I like that on the spine side of the carabiner. So carefully removing my finger while not destroying the aperture in there, I'll put carabiner in and rotate it around, and let's grab my other carabiner and put it parallel to the first one. So there we have the beginnings of our Garda hitch. Okay, well, I don't have free hands, so I'll go ahead and show you how to engage the Garda hitch now. I simply clip it such that as I push it away from me, both carabiners open and engage the rope. And then I take the rope and open only the top carabiner and insert the rope between. I've got a dedicated video on how to engage the Garda hitch, but there you have it. I really just needed the third hand. I'm going to take that up a little higher so you can see how we build the water knot. So on the front here, I've got the short working end, and the water knot is simply the marriage of an overhand knot formed with webbing. And I'm going to form that here. Instead of going over, I'm going to start by going under. So technically that's I guess we'd call it an underhand knot. And the reason I did that is because I want to make sure that the end pokes out in the right direction. So I'm going to create that so it's fairly close to the carabiners. I want this water knot close to the carabiners. And if I've tied this overhand or underhand knot, call it what you like, properly, it lays flat. It doesn't have, it's almost like a necktie feeling. It doesn't have any twists inside of it. I'm then going to go down and trace. I'm going to get the other end of the webbing and make sure that there are no twists in it. And I'm going to trace this through. And I'll do so by going, I start up around the back, tracing this. The exact length of this, well, I don't know yet. I have to tune it for my height. But I'm tracing the path of the original. And the fact that I started with an underhand knot instead of an overhand knot, well, that just makes sure that this is popping out here on the front rather than inside. It's just a little bit more tidy and convenient. Now, what I've got to do next, and I'm going to go out of view for this, is set this at the height that would be necessary for these carabiners, the top of the carabiners, to basically be at the height of my belly button when my foot is in the bottom of the loop. So I'm going to step aside and do that. Okay, so I've got to make a slight adjustment. Going to make a slight adjustment. It turns out that's just a little bit long. I've got to make it just a little bit shorter. How do I do so? I simply take this, because I haven't set it really hard yet, if I want it to be an inch shorter, well, I've got to shoot 2 inches of slack in here. There, it's about 2 inches. And I'll check it again. We want that to be roughly before we've set it, it should sit somewhere between our belt buckle and our belly button so that when we set it, it'll come to belly button height. So I built enough of these to trust that that is the appropriate length. And now I'm going to have to trim off these 2 ends here. I like them to be at least 4-inch tails. And so I'm going to step out of view and come back after I've cut those. Okay, so I've trimmed these so they're probably about 5 inches. I always err on the side of leaving them longer than shorter. But if I leave these unattended, they'll get frayed over time. So I simply take a lighter and I just flame the ends for a few seconds till they start to melt. Just do that to both sides and let that cool. Pretty straightforward. Okay, let's let that cool. And let's build the best friend. My Garda Hitch Footloop kit came with 2 4-foot lengths of sterling TRC cord. Now I know this cord looks thin, and it is, but it is incredibly strong. The strength is over 3,400 pounds or 15.5 kilonewtons. We can trust our life on a doubled strand of this. So I'm going to take one of them and I'm going to start to build the best friend loop. Now, if you go back to the very first video I ever did, I call it my best friend because your best friend is your buddy who's always watching your back, always watching over you, and that's what the best friend does. It's just hanging around waiting for that moment that we might need it. It's our redundancy. I'm going to take this cord and I'm going to take the middle of it, roughly the middle of it, and I'm going to start to tie a clove hitch. Now I've got a dedicated video on the clove hitch and related knots, but I think you'll be able to follow this. I simply create an overhand loop, create a second overhand loop, and take the top one and put it under the other one. That forms a clove hitch. Let me grab my Garda hitch and show you where we insert this. I want it to be sitting right here on the back of the Garda hitch. Here's the gated side. I want it to be sitting right here in this position. And so I will open my carabiners and insert it as such. It's important that the strands are coming out the outside. So in the center, in the inside, I've got the 3 strands. On the back side, I've got the 2 strands with this coming out. That's the clove hitch. Now we're going to tie a sliding double fisherman's knot. Sure, we could use a triple. Now this is a knot that you really should rehearse. See my prior video tying the sliding double and triple fisherman's knot. I don't think I would want you to try that for the first time here. Make sure you've rehearsed that because we're going to try to tie it so it's pretty small and compact. And I will go ahead and get started. Of course, one end is longer than the other, so I'm going to be working with the shorter end. I'll fold this one back. Fold this one back. So this is the other working end, and this is my starting working end. And I'm going to go over and around. I'm working as close as I can to the carabiner. I'm going to go over and around once, twice, and then take this working end and put it through these 2 strands. It's the beginning of a sliding double fisherman's knot. And now I'm going to reorient 180 degrees. 180 degrees. And I'm going to shorten this because I want this to be pretty small. I want it to be, let's clip it on the rope here so we can work a little better. I want it to be pretty small. And I will repeat the process. I'll go over once, twice, and shoot it through. And when you tie, dress, and set a sliding double fisherman's knot and inspect it, it is such that on the front of the knot, as I call it, all four of these strands are parallel to one another. They're all running parallel. And on the back side, they mate together. Let's see one that's been fully loaded. So here's my best friend loop that's been tested an indefinite number of times, and I can still change the length of this. I could pull on one of these two strands and the length of this loop will get slightly smaller. See, I made that smaller. And if I needed to untie it, I simply pull this all the way through. This loop will collapse and it's possible to retie it. I like the sliding double fisherman's compared to what I used in prior designs because it gives us a nice small eye to attach our carabiner and keep it properly oriented and minimize chances of side loading. Okay, so if you can see here, I've got roughly the same size loop. I like to err on the side of making this smaller rather than longer. It's about 6 inches long. And so now I'm going to cut and seal these cords. Be right back. Okay, you can see I've cut these. I just used a block of wood and a knife out of view. Here's some heat shrink tubing. I've got a YouTube short on how to use this. I really advise, this is great stuff to have some in your garage or toolbox. Refer to my website on the shopping list. I have got links for the adhesive shrink wrap tubing that I use to seal the ends of my ropes and cords. It's also handy for building JRB end loops on your ropes. But again, you could use tape. It's just less likely to stand up over time. If you're going to use tape, you might want to put a knot in, an overhand knot first as a stopper, just to make sure if that tape ever come off, it just wouldn't get frayed. I'll let those cool down. Okay, these loops are nice and cool now. Let's set this loop at a good aperture size. So here's a carabiner that represents my lower bridge, and I want it to sit here, but I don't want a lot of flopping, and so I can change the length of a sliding double fisherman's knot by pulling on one of the ends, and I'm going to leave just enough room to get that carabiner through there. It's, you know, I could fit maybe 2 carabiners. I don't want it to be super tight, and then I'll adjust the clove hitch accordingly. And that's it. This is going to stay in place virtually forever. And as I apply load now and really set this, pull on all 4 ends going into this, and I will apply my body weight, you'll see this tighten up and look more like the one that's been used. Okay, let's build the transformation loop. The last knot we need to tie is a longhorn hitch. Again, there are other options, but this is my preference for numerous reasons. I'm going to take this 4-foot length of TRC. I'm going to fold it in this fashion, so that should be 4 1-foot lengths. And it turns out 1 foot is the appropriate length for the working ends for a longhorn hitch. And I'm going to create the longhorn here on my webbing. So my Garda hitch is just up here and out of view. So I'm going to take my 2 working ends and I'm creating a longhorn hitch. I'm just doing it in a transverse fashion. The longhorn hitch, I take both strands, fold them over the host. I'll start with the one on the right or the bottom, go around 360 degrees, take the other strand. Again, you're going to want to practice your longhorn hitch before you try it here. So both have been around 360 degrees and both of them are interlocked. The upper strand has been over the bottom strand, still working with the upper strand. I go down along the host. Taking the other strand, I go behind and over, and then shoot both of these back up through here. So we're using knots that we have practiced and rehearsed in building more complex machines. You've heard me say it a million times. I refer to these knots as tools in our toolbox, and we've got to be able to tie them and rehearse them. This Longhorn hitch, well, we need to know how to tie that anyway. It's the basis of the Longhorn Agile hitch. It's the basis of the Longhorn soft shackle. It's the basis of the Longhorn Zenith hitch. So hopefully most of you are familiar with how to tie the Longhorn. The reason I'm using it here is it cinches in place pretty nicely, but it's still slidable. It's like a really poor friction hitch. And I can, let me get my Garda down a little further so you can see the top of it. When I'm not using this transformation loop, which is most of the time, I can store it here. And the fact that I've got my water knot tied so high, well, it doesn't really matter which side this is on. It could be on the side it's on. I could slide it all the way around to the other side and put it in here. It just stays in there when it's in storage and does nothing. But when I use it in transformation mode, I shorten the foot loop this way. A little difficult for you to follow here in such a zoomed in manner, but I have just shortened my foot loop so it's about 2/3 of its original size, and that is only needed if you're going to be doing stick climbing or hitch climbing. So you could leave this off if you're just doing SRT or DSRT, but the kit contains it, and I wanted you to have all the pieces you need. And of course, as per my video and rope and cord inspection, the cordage has a life expectancy. And so this is a pretty low wear application. It's not like a friction hitch, but as per manufacturer recommendations, I wouldn't use this more than 4 or maximum 5 years before I replaced it. And in fact, I replace my cords every year or so because I climb a lot. But you don't have to untie this sliding double fisherman's knot until it's time to replace it. It's not going to take any wear inside of there. The only place it's going to take wear is where it contacts the carabiners. That's where you would inspect it, here and of course here. Here I've got 2 strands of 8mm rope, 1 strand of 9.5 and 2 strands of 11.4. The Garda hitch engages on either a single strand, push both through, put the rope over the top and inside one. It engages on either 1 strand or on 2 strands. And I use this in my DSRT climbing. The Garda hitch cannot be broken when it's under load. You would need to see my video on recovery scenarios using the Garda hitch if you ever found yourself in a situation where you were hanging from your best friend. But when we get in these larger diameter ropes, now these carabiners work great on a single strand of 11.4mm rope, but once you start to do things like DSRT on 2 strands of 11, well, that's a little bit, moving this, depending on the stiffness of your rope, moving that through is a little bit difficult. And so if you're building a Garda hitch that you want to use on 2 strands of arborist diameter rope, you might want to consider using different carabiners. So these Omega Pacific Phantoms are also available at Rock and Arbor, and I've got links to them on my website. But because these are larger, they work better with arborist diameter ropes. Most of my audience consists of hunters using smaller diameters, but I wanted you to be aware of that detail. All right, so here's the beast. Let's go give it a maiden voyage. Okay, so here we go. I happen to be on a doubled strand of rope, but that doesn't matter. Let's engage our Garda hitch. Pop it through both strands. Take the rope or ropes up and over, open only the top carabiner, and put it in. Let's put our foot in the foot loop. Again, when I stand, the top of the carabiners comes to roughly my belly button. Let's take our redundant bridge. Let's clip it into the best friend loop. Let's load it. Let's stand on it and bounce a little. We're really setting that water knot now and that bull hitch. We're really getting them set and tight. Of course, it'll occur naturally, but we want to be confident in our system before we climb on it. And now let's check our geometry. That length used to create the best friend loop and our redundant bridge determines our step size. So if I sit in my saddle and I raise the Garda as high as it'll go, that determines my maximum step size. And what I like is the redundant bridge and the best friend loop are set at a length that when I pull this up as high as I can and the best friend loop is engaged, that my quadricep, my right leg, is roughly horizontal. That's how I like to run my system. And then it's a simple matter to start your climb. Well, again, I hope I got all the detail that you need, and if not, all these details were covered in prior videos. Go to my website, jrbtreeclimbing.com, dedicated page for the Garda Hitch Footloop, and you'll find that detail. Okay, up and away.